Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you joining us today for the second part of our exploration on the topic, Can you scale up fine wine? I am Pauline Vicard. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Areni Global, and it's my huge pleasure to guide the discussions today. And today is a first. Not only it's the first Insight series of the year, but we usually dedicate only one Insight series per topic. But last December, right after the end of the first part of that conversation, we received so many messages and so many follow-up questions that we decided to invite the panelists back again and continue our exploration on the key topic of growth and financial sustainability within the context of fine wine. So I'm thrilled to welcome back Joao de Silva, Chief Commercial Officer of Sogrape, tuning in from Portugal. How, Joao?
Hi, Pauline.
Welcome back.
Again, thank you.
Vianney, Gravereaux, Sales and Marketing Director for Ornellaia and Masseto, tuning in from Italy. Hi, Vianney.
Buonasera, Pauline.
Buonasera. And Dan Petroski, winemaker at Massican, tuning in from, well, actually New York, but normally from Napa Valley in the US. Hi, Dan.
Good morning, good evening, Pauline, and happy to be back.
And last time we also had Yvan Massonat with us, who's the owner of the Belargus estate in the Loire Valley, but he couldn't join us today, but he has shared some of his ideas that I will try to convey today and add to the conversation. Another key person to welcome today is Sarah Phillips. Hi, Sarah. She's our head of membership, and she's working in the background. Sarah will post some key info on the chat as we go, and some of our past work that might be relevant for today's conversation. And she's also here to answer all the questions that you may have on Areni, on who we are and how we work, should you not know us already. So please don't hesitate to communicate with her. So I believe that some of you in the audience were not with us last December, so just a bit of a recap on what we did last time. So Sarah will be putting the link on the chat for the recap and the main points that were discussed. And for those of you listening to the podcast, we will also put all of this in the show notes and in the description. But basically what we did last time was to answer the key question, why do fine wine producers want or need to scale up? And we took the definition that doing something at scale was to do something at the size required to solve the problem. So we've started by identifying what the problems could be. And so our panelists explore five main motivations behind the need to scale up, from the need to maintain financial sustainability in the face of climate change to the will to increase quality and engage with a larger audience. So today we are going to focus on the practicalities of scaling up and the main obstacles and challenges that wineries face along the way. So as always, please use the chat to share your expertise or comments. I know that some of you might be in similar situation that the panelists today, so please let us know how you handle things and all of your questions in the Q&A box. So as a reminder, should you not know about all of the wineries today, but we've got Joao and Dan. Their specificity is that they have some flexibility in sourcing for their wines and in sourcing grapes at different places, whether Vianney and Ornellaia and Masseto are quite restricted in their growth in terms of quantity and in terms of hectare and the vines. So I'm going to divide, the questions, and the first round will be for Joao and Dan, and Vianney, I'll come to you after that to compare and contrast because you're in a slightly different situation. And Dan, I'd like, yes, Sarah.
Quickly, could you make me a co-host so I can open up the chat for everyone?
Oh, yes, of course.
Sorry to interrupt. And hi, everyone.
That.
Bye.
All right. There you are. You should be able to do that now. Sorry for this confusion, warming up to the new year. So Dan, I wanted to start with you because as a reminder, again, you recently sold your brand to Gallo, and we've explained at length why you've made the decisions and the reason behind the scale up. And if I remember correctly, when we prepare, you mentioned that in terms of growth and in terms of size, the production needed to go from 10,000 cases to 50,000 cases in 5 years. And you know, one of my exploration for today, I would love to understand, how does one find the perfect size between, you know, meeting the challenges that we've discussed last time and meeting the challenges of growth. So if you would like to start us with, how did you come with this volume? So how was this growth determined? Where did you start with? And once you decide on that number, like practically, what was the next step? What did you decided to do, and what does it growth entail?
That's a great question, Pauline, and I hope 3 to 5 to 7 years from now, we'll be talking about Massican at 50,000 cases. I don't think it's unrealistic. I think it's actually a low number. I think it's a glass ceiling that we can blow through. And the reason I say that is because a winery has to begin its journey with the customer with trust. Customers have to trust that you're providing them with a quality product that they enjoy, that is full of deliciousness, and at a price they can afford. And if we can continue to build more customers and more trust, I think the opportunities are limitless. I also feel fortunate in that capacity because I'm working with a couple of grape varieties that are, in one side of the equation, they're esoteric and they're not necessarily known by the consumer. And these are the Italian grape varieties that have built the foundation of Massican, like a Tokai Friulano or a Ribolla Gialla. But at the same time, I'm building the brand with the trust of grape varieties like Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Grigio. White grapes in California are a potential wonderland of opportunity. They yield very well. They maintain their freshness. They have incredible deliciousness. And I think that there's an opportunity there to kind of take a brand like Massican that has been boutique, that has been scarce, that has built trust not only with my peers in the industry who believe, you know, when we work with them from a viticultural side, that we pay our bills on time and we don't ask for too much in the vineyard. We want everyone to grow and be financially successful. And then at the same time, you know, sommeliers and wine buyers nationwide have enjoyed the wines because they can afford to put them on their table, afford to pour them by the glass, and bring a unique experience that a customer who is a traditional California Chardonnay drinker may not have ever experienced in the glass. So we kind of were winning along the way and it's a 15-year journey that I've taken with the brand. And now it's the opportunity to, okay, the real business model is, how do we get to that 50,000 cases? How do we get to that scale? For me, when that number is just kind of as I said, I believe it's a glass ceiling. I think it's something we can blow through, but that's where it really makes financial sense. That's where you start to see the scalability of packaging. At 10,000 cases, 120,000 bottles, that might be the first rung of the ladder where you start to see pricing come down with your glass and your labels and your capsules and your corks. But as you kind of go through it, we can continue to hopefully keep price or lower price in the marketplace as we kind of pass through some savings moving forward. I've only built a brand through working with vineyards in Napa and Sonoma. We have the rest of California ahead of us. So there's better farming to the south and more organic, more healthy, sustainable farming at a cheaper cost. Not necessarily better than the vineyards of Napa and Sonoma on a qualitative basis, but just with regards to how the cost of doing business. So I'm excited about that opportunity because for me, what has made Massican a $30 to $40 price bottle of wine has been the cost of fruit in Napa and Sonoma, where, speaking from a U.S. tonnage basis, we're paying an average of $3,500 to $4,000 a ton in Napa, $3,000 a ton in Sonoma. To sell a $30 bottle of wine with a $4,000 or $5,000 Chardonnay grapes going into it doesn't make a lot of economic sense to the bottom line. So the breadth of opportunity in viticulture and vineyard sourcing with my partners at Gallo is second to none, and it's going to be a joyous experience for me as a winemaker to go out and venture afield.
So I'm very curious because you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned the cost of dry goods and, you know, how you can save with the scale and the price of grapes as well, and your raw material. And in practicality, for me to be able to envision this, how how do you work out, like, do you have a giant Excel spreadsheet where you've got like complex formula that if you go over 120,000 bottles, then your price of dry goods is, you know, your price of bottle goes from, you know, $1 a bottle to 80p a bottle, of those kind of things? And then how precise do you need to be? Like, what kind of tools, what kind of data did you use to arrive to that number?
It's a great question. And yes, there is that spreadsheet. That spreadsheet started when I started Massican in 2009, and I've updated it every 5 years throughout the business planning. It's pretty straightforward when you're dealing with your a glass broker or a label broker for a decade or more. So every year to ask them where the price break is, at what level of volume do I need to hit to get this from being 26 cents per label to 20 cents per label. And that way you can build that into your model, into a kind of a repository, a data inventory worksheet that you can pull from. So as you start to source, in California, we have a thing called the Grape Crush Report. The Grape Crush Report gives you the average value of grapes sold in the state on an annual basis, broken down by variety and by region. So I can look at Sauvignon Blanc in Lodi and see that the average value is X. Do I want to be an average winery? No. Do I want to buy wine at the 90th percentiles or 95th percentile of quality? Yes. So I can actually build into a spreadsheet what that costs. So every 5 years, I would update my spreadsheet and make sure I was on target. And that's basically how we can kind of look at the price to scalability ratio of your economic impact to your bottom line.
So once you've decided on this, so you've made all your calculation, you've made the Excel spreadsheet work, what's the easiest part and what's the most difficult one? Because I would naively think that, for example, dry goods would be the easiest part, because you just go back to your supplier and you say, well, instead of buying 10,000 bottles, I'm going to buy, you know, 50,000. But it seems that today getting your hands on dry goods might not be that easy, and then I would think that, you know, sourcing the grape would be the most difficult part. But what, from your experience, what's the most difficult part and the easiest part to scale up once you've made those decisions?
You hit the nail on the head. The easiest part is that spreadsheet. The easiest part is asking the question about how much things cost. Sourcing has only been a problem in the United States during the pandemic. There's never been a problem prior to 2020 with us getting glass or capsules or corks.
Is it back to normal now in terms of sourcing? Okay.
Timing is back to normal. Pricing is back to normal from my perspective. Maybe some people in the chat and on the call can actually speak to that and from their perspective in the United States. But everything I've experienced since 2022, last year's vintage, being bottled in 2023 calendar year, has been back to normal. It goes back to the hardest part, which I think we hit in the top 5 of the recap of last conversation. Is the hardest part is selling wine. It's that has been and always will be the hardest part. Everyone can have a great vision for a product and put a delicious wine under cork, but making sure they get it in front of the right people, the right audience of people that can, and that person is not always the consumer. That person is the in-between middleman, the distributor, the importer, the sommelier, the beverage director, the sales representative at a local retail shop. So you have many customers along the pipeline, and making sure you can get in front of the right ones has always been the hardest part. So being able to differentiate yourself like Massican has with our product line has given me a foot in the door. I think quicker and easier than a lot of other peers in the industry from Napa Valley and Sonoma. When there's, you know, it's like the Italians at the gate, right? Like Napa Valley is 600 Cabernets, you know. So what does that line look like at the front of the retail shop or 11 Madison Park, which is right down the street? Like it looks like a bunch of people trying to get through a small door. Massican could walk through that door pretty easily without any competition on my side. So
how do you cut the line? Yeah, how do you cut the line? How do you enter into the club? Like, what kind of shoes do you need to wear? But it's funny. It's I was, you know, thinking about this as you were speaking. It's the change of paradigm that we had in the last 25 years, where what you're saying, it's now easy, well, kind of easy, because we all know it's not that easy, but to make a great wine. But actually the challenge is really into selling it now. I think we're going to talk about this with Vianney as well, because scaling up for you is mostly distribution more than production. But before we move to Vianney, Joao, I wanted to ask you, because you're in a similar position than Dan. you manage a large portfolio of wines at Sogrape. And when we prepared that conversation, you were very clear, like you've established that your company's growth was closely linked to the growth of your prestige brands and the premium brands that you have in your portfolio, which I assume took a lot of strategy and meeting in your company. But once you've decided this, when it's established that prestige brands must grow to lead the growth of the entire company, what are the next steps? So you go out of that meeting, you know that you need to grow your prestige brand. How does that work? Where do you start, and how do you decide the speed at which you can grow?
Well, with a little crystal ball,
Yeah.
we can make miracles. No, we can only wish. That's the first answer I would imagine. I think that there's a preceding step. I mean, one needs to be sure, and following on Dan's steps, that we have the wines, and that we have the wines inside the bottles, and the bottles are corked, that allow us to go out. And once we establish this will, this purpose for the business, it's actually about working on reputation and on distribution. And before we aligned on this will that the company as a whole should grow, driven by the growth of our prestige portfolio, as we call it, we had to establish the reputation of the brands. We had some brands with established reputation already, but we had to do a lot of work, and we've been working on this for 10 years now. And once we felt that we had a reputational base that was good enough, then we moved into distribution. Then you move into pushing the product in the market. I think we were fortunate because this happened coincidentally during a period where tourism boomed in Portugal. So we had access to an international audience of consumers, which would otherwise have thought that Portugal was an exotic place somewhere lost in an unknown continent. Not any longer, I'm glad to say, and therefore we have been able to ride that wave, not just domestically with this tourism boom, but also in international markets where the door was, narrowly opened. If we would talk about this topic 6 to 7 or 8 years ago, not widely open by now, but open enough for us to have at least some time in front of the clients, being able to plan our work, both with what we call key opinion leaders, which are also important for reputation purposes, but also in terms of clients. I mean, you have to explain your wines. You have to, you have to tell them why you believe they're different and not just another wine inside another bottle. And I think that was the way. Now, how do we come to a number? We look at competition, and not only to Portuguese wine competition, but to international names with whom we like to compare ourselves. We do a lot of tasting. We do look to a lot of data. And
if I can just interrupt here, because that's really interesting. When you do your tasting and your benchmark, like the club in which you want to enter, to take Dan's image in, knocking at the door, what are the wines? I mean, in terms, do you compare by style of wine? So because of your style of wine, you will compare with, I don't know, you mentioned other wines from Portugal, but will you compare with Cabernet from Napa, or even the Ornellaia wines that Vianney work with? Like, how do you establish who's your competition, for lack of a better word, but the other people that you would like to see seating next to you?
We compare using two, let's say, two dimensions. One is about reputation.
Okay.
We want to have to have a reputation which is comparable to X, Y, and Z, and we also compare with styles. And the comparison with styles, it's extremely important, particularly when you come from a less known production country like Portugal, if you're sitting in front of a professional buyer, let's say in the US market, but in France or in Italy would probably be very similar. You need to be able to explain your wine not just on technical terms, but in terms that the person in front of you can relate to, right?
Yeah.
And in the US, this is absolutely critical, and obviously in the US, the California Cabernet Sauvignons for a lot of high-end Douro wines, for example, are important. Not for Barcavelli, which has a particular profile, but for a lot of high-end Douro wines, this is critical, and you have to describe them. When you're gonna taste this wine, it's gonna remind you of a certain
This thing,
wine,
yeah.
so and so, something that we know he or she can relate to, and then you explain what the differences are, right?
Yeah.
So this comparison is extremely important. Otherwise, it's as if you'd be talking Chinese, and it'll take you.
But that's why I ask you, because sometimes, as a French person, people sometimes say, well, you should stop comparing yourself to the French, because until very recently, people always use French wine, or most of the time use French wine from different regions to compare themselves with. And I was wondering, for you in Portugal, would your style compare, because your styles are unique, or if you come from a country that has a grape variety that's lesser known or have less, international comparison, a bit like you, Dan, you have other counterparts in the world, but they're not as famous as Cab or Chardonnay or Pinot Noir.
I think the trick is to be able, first, you always need to talk or to speak in a language that your
counterpart understands.
Your counterpart understands, right? And this has not only to do with speaking in English or in French or in Italian, but also speaking a wine language that he or she understands, right? And using comparables that we know are more familiar to the people we're talking to is obviously an advantage. Now, talking about and different regions in Portugal compare differently with world regions. I mean, we can use the Douro and compare it with the Californian Cabs, or we can use for the wines in Alentejo a sort of more New World style, and therefore we can use New World comparables. When we go to the down, a lot of times we use the wines from Bourgogne as a comparison as well, and it depends. I mean, it really depends. And then you have to introduce what differentiates you, and that's where the local varieties.
So you find what connects you. Connects you with people.
Yeah,
and going back to that question of scale and what's the next step once you decided, but also how because growth take resources and investment, so you have to prioritize investment. Is it like a step, 1 year I'm going to invest in viticulture and make sure that the quality will stay? And we've talked about climate change and the new waves of investments that you have to do to just maintain quality. And then 1 year you invest on reputation. Is that kind of building up, or you kind of do everything at the same time? How do you prioritize?
Yeah. There comes a time when you have to invest pretty much 360, and you're investing in all areas. But if you're looking to a business that is more at its early stages, investment comes first and foremost at the vineyard and at the winery, because that's what ensures that you have the consistency, that you need, and then you start investing in reputation. And then gradually you increase your investment in sales and distribution and communication in general. I mean, reputation is already part of communication, and that I would say it's probably the sequence which is the most traditional. Once you get to a certain stage of maturity, because it's not to say that you can stop investing in the vineyard or at the winery, because that's a never-ending process. You come to a stage where you're investing in everything, and nowadays, I'm not sure if this is common to everyone, but in particular, it's particularly common exactly because of this boom in tourism that we've been going through, and the fact that we are such a relatively small production country in comparison to the size of the world market that we want to face, the importance of people that visit us, being them professionals or final consumers, is of such relevance that we need to invest a lot in capacity to welcome people. Wine tourism in general, if you want to,
which is also linked to the reputation, I guess. The bigger your reputation, it's quite logical that more and more people want to come in and visit you in some sort of fashion.
It's linked with your capacity to tell a certain story and to hold that story at a certain level. Absolutely.
Yeah. Before I go to Vianney and ask him about distribution, I'm sure you've established, but how long, if you consider some of the investment that you are currently doing, and if you can give us some examples, that'd be amazing. How long will it take you to see return on investment? So how do you integrate, how do you measure that notion of return on investment? How do you calculate it?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's easier to say how we calculate it, because that's traditional. I mean, we use traditional discounted cash flow methodologies for investments, and therefore we're in that respect very standard. Now there are certain investments where, and this is the fact that we're a family-owned business is so important. The fact that we have a certain scale and therefore financial resources that allow us to make, and back to Dan's argument at the first stage of this conversation, allows us to allow for certain investments with very long payback periods, on almost thinking not on a discounted cash flow basis, but on an asset value. There are assets where we have invested that we know we're investing for the next generation or the following generation. So we're looking at 15, 20, 25 years periods of return, and that's an asset reasoning that goes well beyond discounted cash flow.
Yeah.
Okay, and that is in particular for investments that are related to this general definition of wine tourism. I mean, if you're investing in the property in an estate house, that it's a manor that is going to stay there for the next 50 or 100 years, you can't really apply discounted cash flow as if you'd be investing in a vineyard or a winery equipment that that it's going to be outdated 5 or 6 years from now. So there are different ways of doing this, but I would definitely recommend that you do not abandon careful financial calculations when you're looking at investments. Absolutely.
It's a bit of both. Thank you. So Vianney, as I was saying in the introduction, in your case, you can't really increase production. You more or less stuck with the number of hectares that you have, because in Bulgaria you can't really buy vineyards very easily or fruit very easily, and you wouldn't want to buy anything anyway. You want to be very specific about the ground and the land that you buy. So when we talked, you mentioned that for you, scaling up is mostly about distribution. Can you tell us a bit more about this? Like, what does it mean to scale up distribution? And again, when we start with that paradigm, what are the next steps, the first steps that one takes?
Oh, that's a pretty broad question.
I know.
Indeed, of course, we have rich people problems, in the sense that, as you rightly said, we cannot really grow in volume. You could argue that we could make a bit less of second wine and a bit more of first wine, but we're not getting into this. That's not the point. And as I said last time, I think Bulgaria is about the size of Margaux, 1,200 hectares, more or less, 80-something producers, and very, very, very little in terms of grape or land transactions. So what does that leave us with? Of course, the quality of the distribution, and that goes through working hand in hand. It sounds very obvious, but with your distribution network. And the amount of time we spend reviewing where our bottles are distributed by our distributors is quite long. It's quite heavy. It's a big part of 2 periods in the year. with the whole team and with the team of the distributors. And it's also helped by having people on the ground. Particular case of Ornellaia, there is one person in the for North America, one person covering Asia, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, and two people covering Europe. So when we take a deep, hard look at our distribution, we have the input of all these people. It's not just me and my crystal ball, as Joao was saying. And we try to base it on experience and numbers. Of course, there are things we'll miss. But it's also about the landscape of distribution is changing. So the more fingers you have in the plug, the better info you have, and the hopefully better decisions you can make. Simply put.
So again, a very naive notion that I had is that with the fact of scaling up come the necessity to let go or to loosen control. But it doesn't seem, it's almost the contrary for you, is that you even more invested in controlling everything, right? Because
we're not scaling up by volume. And even if we were, and this is a discussion I often have, and we've had, Pauline, quite often people compare great wines to luxury products. But the big difference, I mean, we always look with the team, we look for ideas, we try to have our noses at the window. We look at what some luxury brands are doing, but the big difference between top-end wine and luxury products is that we do not control the point of sale. I'm not including the California must be maybe a bit different with mailing lists and cellar doors, but overall, we do not control the point of sale. We do not control the last contact between the product and the consumer. And the consumer. So we have to accept that. It's a fact of life. But we have to be even better on the upstream part because we know that we won't be there for the last mile. So
is that notion of control? How do you relate with that? Is growing? Is that notion of loosen control or keeping control? How do you manage it? Because you're going to grow exponentially. Can you keep controlling everything like you did before, or what do you put? What are the safeguarding things that you put in place to manage that notion?
It's well, again, we are not growing by volume, so that's one thing. So we have a set amount. Call it a set amount, varies from vintage to vintage, but overall we have a relatively constant amount of wine. And we are fortunate enough that they encounter a growing demand, which gives us, for lack of a better word, more power. And it gives us the ability to be a bit more selective in our distribution. So of course, I think it's Dan who was talking about 11 Madison Park and, the 800 California Napa producers lining up on the door, in front of the door. Everybody will tell you they want to be in all the 3 Michelin stars of this world, but the world is not limited to 3 Michelin stars, and thank God. Even though God knows we have great experiences there, but there's more to it, and you have to know in your market where you have the 3 Michelin stars of this world, but you also have the places where the wine lovers go. I could give you a few addresses in Paris which are not 3 Michelin stars, but you will find amazing wine lists and serious wine lovers going there to enjoy and share. It's important to be aware of these places and also to be there, because you will meet some serious wine lovers there, not only in the 3 Michelin stars. So allow me to be a bit more philosophical here, but one of my masters, the guy who invented the Black Swan idea, Nicolas Taleb, had beautiful chapters in his before last book about the via negativa. The idea being that what you don't do is sometimes as important, if not more, as what you do. And already taking care, and as Steve Jobs was saying, who you're not selling to is probably as important as who you're selling to. So having all these boots on the ground, and that's not a nice way of talking about my great team, because they're way more than boots on the ground, but who know what's happening in the markets, who know what the sommeliers are saying, who know who's moving where, who know where is the cool latest place to drink great white wine in Hong Kong, etc., is a first step. And who knows, sadly, there are places where probably the presence of your wine is less desired. And it's as important to know what are these places than what are the ones you want to be into.
So if I were to ask you, what's the biggest risk that you are risking? Like, what keeps you awake at night? What kind of mistake are you afraid of making? And I'll ask you the same question, Dan, after that.
Oh, now that's...
Is that selling to the wrong person, or
what keeps me, well, quite a few things keep me awake at night. Not awake at night, but it's difficult. It's interesting. There's the known unknowns, the known knowns, and etc.
yes.
Let's say that a couple of years ago, I stumbled upon an offer of Masseto from a perfectly legitimate merchant who was making perfectly normal margins, who is respected in his country and on this continent, but for whatever reason, thought it was a good idea to have an offer to private customers with slash prices. That is the kind of thing that goes viral online and can do, it's not that it does damage, but the amount of firefighting you have to do afterwards is taxing. It's not going to bring down the name, but if they multiply and if you don't take action, it's not a good thing. And it means that maybe we were wrong in working with this customer. And everything said, all the pointers were good, but when I saw that, it really drove me mad. Of course, there are things you can't absolutely can't control. Imagine if I don't know, if murder is committed with a broken bottle of one of your wines and it's caught on mobile phone, or if some major drug lord is arrested with a cellar full of your wines and that goes on TV. But that's what you can't control. So let's focus on what we can control. That keeps us busy enough.
Dan, what scares you the most? Like when you look at what you have to achieve, and I'm sure there's so many parts of that's very much exciting to grow your brand, but the part that you think will be the biggest obstacles that are in your way, if you had to describe them?
Well, first off, I just want to say to Vianney, thank you for making me laugh about the drug lord comment and the cellar, because I do think the wine industry, a fear of mine is the wine industry lacks a lot of fun. That's a conversation for another seminar. But I'm going to say something that actually was a qualitative thing that scares me and keeps me up at night, but it's also a business decision. When I was making 4,000 bottles, up to 84,000 bottles, I believed fine wine needed to be under natural cork. Massican is an aromatic white wine brand where if you look at the bottle the wrong way, it'll be shy on its aroma profile and its flavor profile. So it's a very delicate, very fragile a relationship with the consumer and the glass. So I was up at night every night knowing that each natural cork is unique unto itself, and it would not be molded with TCA, but it was going to have a variable impact on the bottle of wine. So I would have 84,000 bottles of wine where I would be worried about being presented properly to the end customer, because sometimes you have one shot, one impression. But I had to be fancy, and I had to be fine wine. I had to put it under natural cork. I needed to make it feel expensive. But the move to technical corks has been a financial windfall for me, saving 40 cents plus per cork, and hours of sleepless nights have now been passed aside, where now I know that these technical corks have a consistency and a lack of variability across the board, but they are also very much being accepted in the world of fine wine. Dominique Lafon, I think, started in 2014 putting his wines under DM, and I think this is those are at a price point that the world of consumption and the fine wine space is going to start to realize that this is an acceptable option. So I think that's, I went from a qualitative fear to a business decision that quelled quality fears, but also increased my margins, which was probably the smartest thing Massican has done in the last 3 years.
I hope you won't mind me asking, but it's just a small conversation between us. But I know that there was a project to do Massican wine that would retail at $75, and you were not really in favor of that project, when it can be easily argued that you would have the market for this. Can you tell us why you didn't choose that option as a growth path?
For sure. I've never started Massican as a means to a financial end. I started it as a means to accessible wines on the table, white table wines. I did not choose to write white table wines on my bottles in 2009, 2010, because I felt the consumer marketplace didn't understand what that meant. And even the sommeliers and the wine buyers back then, it's like, it's a white table wine, even though it was purely an alcohol classification. So, and I think today, putting the alcohol on it is all about transparency. There was a movement, obviously, in the United States that talked about low alc wines, but that's neither here nor there. But for me, I looked at this goes back to Joao's conversation. There's some chat about like fine wine and its competitive set and how you think about that. I looked to Enzo Pantoni in Italy's Northeast and Friuli and his Vianney wines. And Vianney wines, his white wines are Tocai Fiorano based wine, Sauvignons, Ribolas. They are some of the most expensive United States white wines of those grape varieties in the $100 retail range. And his production has always been minute. It's always been 800 cases, 10, 12,000 bottles. And there's a business model there, but it's not my business model. It's not my ethos of the brand. My brand is about, I think, scale and reputation. I love the idea of reputation. Reputation can be about, a unique cultish reputation, but to be a true, really recognized brand, it's about scale. It's about how many bottles you can put on tables. And then you can create a windfall of reputational value that'll carry the brand through a velocity of increased production. But for me, $75, there are great wines in this world that I want to drink for $75, and they're not mine. And I'm not demeaning my wines or my brand at all. I'm just saying that this wine is built for people that will want to strive aspirationally to pay 30 or 40 or 50 US dollars per bottle, or 60 or 70 at a restaurant, because that's a lot of money to a lot of wine consumers that still are quite fancy and luxurious and would be considered fine wine in other products and services that they have, whether it be a Tesla or Gucci loafers. They still might not be spending $75 on a bottle of wine.
And thank you, because that's a fascinating tie-in, because one of the things that keeps me awake at night, one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, is fine wine is almost by nature expensive, more expensive than others. It might become more and more expensive because it will be more and more expensive to produce, but also as reputation grow, the natural price movement means that more people want it, there's no more produced, there's more scarcity, the price goes up. At the point to at certain level, it's almost accessible only to the 0.01%, and they're going to be rarer and rarer. And Joao and Vianney, that's certainly the case for Barcavella and Masseto. But if then they become too exclusive, too rare, then, as you were saying, Dan, they don't reach enough people, so you don't have the scale of at least palate that you've impacted, if it's not wallet who bought your wine. So how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile the notion of scarcity, availability, exclusivity, when you're not in the in the position that Dan is, $35 and fine, Joao and Vianney, you're far from those prices where Barcavella and Masseto. So how do you do, Joao? How do you reconcile those three notions? How do you make sure that Barcavella is exclusive, is scarce by nature, but is still available to enough people that it maintains relevance?
Well, I think there are a couple of points that you have to take into consideration. The one thing we refuse to do is we refuse to speculate, right? More often than not, we have decided to, I mean, we could have followed the market. Barcavelli is a very particular case because it comes out only in particular years. So on average, it's been about 20 vintages since 1952. So it's once every 3 years, more or less. And so we always look at the markets that are running in the prices that are running in the market, you know, for the previous harvests and you know, and the scarcity that we have and all that. And we refuse to speculate. I mean, had we speculated throughout the years, probably the price would have gone up through the roof. We also do look at you know, prices that are being practiced in other wines with whom we like to compare ourselves. This is not about the wine in itself, but the name, the brand,
yeah, the class of, yeah.
We respect our philosophy as a winery, as a wine producer. We've got a number of wineries, and each one of them has its own philosophy, as Dan was saying. That's why he refused certain prices, and ours is exactly that. And therefore, we cannot impose prices. As Vianney was saying, we cannot fully control the point of sale, the final end point, but we do as much as we can to try to control the more that we can. So we control distribution, and in that respect, we recommend prices which are not obviously obligatory. We cannot do that, but we recommend prices, and we establish our Excel prices in such a way that, to a certain extent, it is an evolution that is controlled. And in all our wineries, I have to say, we have a price pyramid. And in that respect, yes, we do recognize that. I mean, Barcavelli, which is now trading at, if I'm not mistaken, between 900 and 1,000 euros a bottle, particularly in those countries where it is most valuable, such as Portugal and Brazil, in particular, about $600 in the US. You know, it's not accessible for most of us. And as Dan was saying, maybe I can also say, well, there are a lot of very nice wines for less than $600 a bottle that I would rather drink as well. It's not that I'm not fortunate enough to not to taste Barcavelli, but you know, there are other things, and therefore in that price pyramid, we make sure that we also have wines that are priced at other levels, and that can represent at each of their levels the best quality and the best reputation and the best original wine identity that can be established.
Yeah,
and I think it's by doing this consistently along as many years as you can that provides you with this feeling. You know, is it 100% under our control? No, it is not. I mean, if I would quote you the price at which a Barcavelli bottle sells in Brazil, for example, it would shock anybody. But it's not the price at which we sell it. It's the price that is valued at the end in the market.
And that's, I mean, Yvan was saying this as well. He was saying that, you know, selling his wine, some of his wine at 20 euros was a political statement for him, because he wasn't making much money with them. That wasn't the idea. But he wanted to build that pyramid so that people could enter through different price points and discover that. And that's the importance of having a range.
There's a point which is very important for us as a company. I mean, as a family-owned business, the philosophy of our work is to be here for a long time, to be here for generation after generation. In order to do that, this notion of fairness is extremely important. If you misbehave, you can actually get away with misbehavior for, you know, some years. I don't know how many, but for some years. But the next generation will pay a price, that's for sure. and we cannot act in a way that puts knowingly at risk our reputation in such a way that the next generation doesn't inherit a better business than the one that we've started with. So I think it's maybe it sounds too much philosophical, but it's the way it works, to be very honest.
And we always go back to one of the difference with fine wine is fine wine's relationship with time, is that it's that consistency through time, and you never do something for short term, and you've expressed it very well, all three of you. But Vianney, I wanted to ask you the same question that I asked Joao. How do you manage that delicate equation between scarcity, exclusivity, but still accessibility? For example, you know, Masseto was launched a few years ago. Was that also part of the reason was to make it more accessible to more people? Or how do you deal with the fact that so many people want to taste your wine, but there's so little available?
Well, you cannot go against the laws of physics. There's only so much to go around. We do not produce bottles like, you know, like in the cartoons where you put a drop of water on a cake and a second cake appears right next to it. It just doesn't work that way. That's probably good. And it's so we cannot ensure that everyone has access. That's impossible, and it's also the definition of a very rare wine.
Yeah.
But we talking about the laws of physics, you can think of two things. You can think of, I always say that these bottles have a GPS and they are subject to gravity. Bottles of a wine like Masseto will find their way to people who want to enjoy it, and when they taste it for the first time, if they want to taste it again, they will find another way to get there, to get these bottles. So these bottles have a form of GPS, and when I say gravity, there's only so much to go around. It trickles down, and hopefully we try to organize our distribution so that it reaches the kind of customers who understand and are interested in that wine. So you can't satisfy every demand, but I always say that even Romanée Conti participates in events. God knows they could stay in Bonne-Romanée and do nothing, and still, even them, they do events. So it's extremely important to maintain a face.
And at least you occupy the space, even if it's not with, you know, wines on every glasses, but to keep your foot on the ground, as you were saying.
I'll tell you about Masseto, but I'll also tell you an example. Of course, you can think that mostly wines of like Masseto are drunk in, let's say, New York, London, Frankfurt, Paris, Rome, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. But it's in fact way broader than that. And a couple of years ago, I went to Colombia for 2 Masseto events. People said, "Why are you going to Colombia?"
in South America, not Columbia University in the US.
Colombia, and this has nothing to do with what I said about the drug lord thing earlier on. So we went to Colombia, and considering the allocation that Colombia gets, probably my plane ticket, what we made on the bottles was less than the cost of the plane ticket, but through a extremely highly qualitative distributor, the level of wine lovers we were able to meet, the level, the places where we did the 2 events, the level of access we had. And in fact, what these wine lovers showed me, the pictures that they showed me of their own private cellars, which, not getting into the technicalities of Colombian wine distribution, but most likely bottles bought in Miami, Houston, wherever, was impressive, and it definitely justified. So I'm not saying that wines like Masseto should do events in Colombia every year, but there is a long tail. You know, there is more to the fine wine world than New York, Hong Kong, Tokyo, London, Paris, Frankfurt, Rome, Zurich, and Milan. So do not forget these people and these customers, and go and meet them, go and talk to them, go and show them love. And I learned so much about Masseto by talking to Colombian fans of Masseto. Never forget these overlooked of kind of places. And you mentioned Masseto. In fact, Masseto was born that 4 hectares were added to the original 7 hectares of Masseto because it was discovered that the famous blue clay vein, in fact, was continuing beyond a certain row of trees. But we waited 25 years for the juice produced by these grapes to reach Masseto level. And when we felt that they had reached Masseto level, all of a sudden the palette from which we could choose from to make Masseto was a bit broader. So we were able to make an even stricter selection for Masseto, to make a wine with an easier, a younger drinking window perspective that we call Massetino. And this wine is clearly, and of course, everything being relative. And we're talking about the second wine of 1,000 plus retail, first wine. But it certainly, in a few key markets, has allowed us to broaden the circle and the appeal of Masseto. Markets where Masseto had not difficulty, but was not necessarily doing as well as we thought it could be doing. Definitely with Massetino, we are bringing more people to the aromatic profile, the story of the estate.
Amazing.
But only there is no third wine in the plans. That's what you want to know.
Of course, that's always what I wanted to know. Dan, so Vianney was mentioning that you have to go where there's real love, and there's so many places in the world. So far, you've been only in the US. Do you have a plan to scale up outside of the US? And how different would you envisage scaling up outside? Like, what kind of other elements will you have to take into consideration should you want to go outside of your national market, if my question makes sense?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in Napa Valley with this concept that the word no is the easiest word to sell wine. When you tell someone no, you cannot have it, or I am sold out, or we are sold out. These are concepts and philosophies of that supply and demand growth strategy. But I learned early on with Massican, when I was here in New York City with someone who was a distributor and mentor of mine, told me, he goes, being sold out 2 years in a row is cool. Being sold out 3 years in a row is not cool. You cannot take wine off of wine lists. Once you do that, you're going to lose your customers over time. You want to be consistent. So what that implied to me as a business strategy was, don't throw paint on the wall. You need to focus on markets. Massican has actually contracted under Gallo. And the reason for that is because we don't have enough wine to be distributed to all the states that we'd like to be in. So we're going to start slow. We're going to feed the machine, which is like of New York City or California, and make sure that we are hitting a saturation point. And right before we hit the saturation point and we have more production, we will then expand. So Europe might be on the cards in 2024, 2025 for Massican, but when we're only in 10 markets domestically and we have 30 or 40 more to go, I'm not interested in being in London for the sake of being in London, although I would love to be traveling and hanging out with you, Pauline. But I'd much rather decide to kind of support where the love is and where the support of Massican is, and whether it be Missouri or California or hopefully in Florida in the next couple of years.
Yeah, we thank you for saying this. Like, thank you for saying also, it's not cool to be sold out. Always, because we had that conversation. Our latest podcast was with Pascaline Lepartier, that Dan, and she was saying how difficult it is, and the impact for a sommelier, for a creative, a wine list, that when those wines that you've started building suddenly have attained such a reputation that they disappear and they're not accessible anymore, and you constantly have to find replacement for the wine list. And that's something also that I think is important to keep in mind when you build a brand and when you want to scale up, is how do you deal with your current fan and the people that have accompanied you building that reputation, and making sure that you do not create, that you also show them the love that they've shown you along the way and helped you along the way. So I think that was thank you so much for that comment. Yeah, and Nicole is saying, yeah, she's also experienced the frustration when your distributor doesn't follow through to replenish sold out wines, and then it disappeared and it disappeared from the shelf. I think, Vianney, that must be also something that keeps you awake at night, like to make sure that, there's sufficient wines in different places, I'm sure. Well, I'll be totally transparent. I was afraid that we wouldn't have enough questions to keep us going for an hour, but as usual, you guys have been fantastic. I've learned so much, and it's already 5 p.m. my time. We had some questions in the Q&A. I'm sorry I couldn't address them because one was such a deep questions that we would have needed another hour to ponder, but thank you so much for asking it, because that gives us idea for another Insight series on that topic. So thank you all very much for tuning in to this Areni Global Insight series. A couple of things that I should not forget, because Sarah told me not, like, I'm always so bad at remembering what I have to say, but Sarah is going to put you on the chat. We have a roundtable dedicated to that question of growth and financial sustainability. So roundtables are a little bit different because this is a panel. We only have 3 panelists talking and chatting, but roundtable is a group of 8 to 10 people, and we work together on those key questions. So if you want to bring your thoughts around the table, if you want to learn from your peers, if you want to ask questions, if you want to, you know, Sarah will give you all the details into how to register for this. It's at the end of February. And we've also launched our new report today. We do that every quarter. We have a new report to study the fine wine consumer. The one that we've launched today is about the Singapore fine wine market. So you can go to our website, and again, Sarah is putting you everything on the chat to discover that new report. If you're not a member yet of Areni Global, please become a member and support our work. And you will be able to unlock all the analysis, all the reports, join the roundtables and everything. So until next time, thank you very much. Cheers. It's time for a glass of wine for me now. Dan, maybe another coffee for you. And thanks again, and see you very soon. Sorry for disappearing into the dark. My light's not very good. Bye, everyone.